Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
The readings this morning reflect the theme of respecting and promoting human dignity. There can be no peace without justice and respect for human rights. That was once spoken by Irene Khan, a Bangladeshi lawyer and former Secretary General and of Amnesty International, suggesting that an absence of peace will always reveal an absence of respect for human worth and dignity. Pope Francis, the present Pope, the first Pope to come from the Americas and from the Southern Hemisphere, began his career as a janitor, a bouncer, and a lab technician. As Pope, he once observed, "Human rights are not only violated by terrorism, repression, or assassination, but also simply by unfair economic structures that create huge inequities." Angelina Grimke was a political activist in 19th century America, and she advocated for women's rights, supported the movement for the women's vote, and was one of only 2 females working against slavery in the American South before it was abolished. The other woman was her sister. She said, "I recognize no rights but human rights. I know nothing of men's rights or women's rights. Only human rights," offered as wisdom for our journeys.
May we walk in it.
Thank you, Donna. She just swells those notes so beautifully. Thank you for that very, very much. I have been presenting, at work on the subject of human rights, and I've always wanted to give you a bit of it. And then as I went to give you a bit of it, I thought, it's what we do here all the time. So I've gone a little deeper into things about rights, about what that's about, from a perspective of what we're grounded in, what we're guided by, and what we want to know how to do better. And so I've framed it in terms of our connections with all people. And it's always struck me as so important that when we say we are grounded in the interconnections of life, that we're all is one and we are affected by everything, that doesn't tell us how to live. There's not a drop of morality in that statement. It is pure scientific fact. The world is connected. things affect each other. That is just a basic level fact. It does not tell us how to live in that. And you would think, if it matters to you, you think, well, of course it does, because if we're all connected, it matters what we do, and we ought to. But there's no ought. In David Hume, the philosopher David Hume, brilliant man, lived a long time ago. He said you can't get an ought, O-U-G-H-T, from an is. And what he meant by that is, when you look at all the is that's out there, all the facts and reality, you can't get from just the is to what we ought to do about it. That's a moral jump. That's a choice of how we want to live, which is why we separate that. Grounded in life, eyes wide open, looking at the whole world. And then what do we choose, to be guided by? And that's when we insert our own morality or lack of morality or whatever we insert. What do you do with those interconnections? Because those interconnections can be used very well for oppression, for greed, for exploitation. If everything's connected, well, then I'm going to affect people for my own gain. So we insert the morality into that fact. And so I wanted to go back, and I've got lots of very nice big PowerPoints. So if you could have, for the first part of all this, no me, just PowerPoint pictures, that would be great. Okay, there. That's going back, that right there on that slide is a short history of human rights, starting from way back in time, and we're going to do a little bit of that, and coming up to the present. And what I'm hoping we catch with that is it's a long human story, figuring out how we should treat one another, how we will treat one another, and how we'll stick up for how we want to treat with each other. So I'm going to go to the next, I'll just keep saying next slide, and we'll look at a bit of history there. Next slide is from 2100 before the Common Era, which is the adjusted and revised and well-revised way of talking what used to be BC and AD. That is Sumerian writing, which if some of you had taken Sumerian in high school, you'll know how to read. It's actually, Sumerian is where the Euphrates River crosses the Tigris River, and that's what's Mesopotamia. It was called Mesopotamia. That's where we got our start there. And even back in that 2100 BCE, that writing is about how we should treat each other. They were already figuring it out, writing it down, saying, let's think of others as well. It works out better that way. So I asked that question at work a lot, and the question is, and I invite an answer here. If I asked you, who on the planet has worth, what would your answer be? Everyone. The group here on a Zoom crowd, the group in the hall here very quietly said everyone. So I'm just going to try it again. Who on the planet has worth? Everyone.
Everyone.
There you go. The sad, tragic thing is that not everyone on the earth would have answered that way. Not everyone would have said, everyone has worth. There are many countries, there are many people that would say, this kind of person, not that kind of person, not that kind of person, or even individually, not that person has worth. And the whole history of human rights is an attempt to say everyone has basic worth. We didn't get it from the is, we didn't get it from what's out there, or even in here. Doctors look at our insides and we don't look very beautiful inside. Where do we get it from? It's choice. It's always been a choice. How do we say everyone when other people are saying some and not others? Look back in your history, World War II, and we're going to look a bit of that. So in Mesopotamia, they were starting to write down, we think it matters how we treat people. Next slide. I didn't put his picture because he looks just terrible. He was a king in Babylon, and he started writing down, those are the writings of the Babylonians about how they would treat people. And way back then, 1760 BCE, they talked about divorce, about property, about the prohibition of incest came then, the fair wages for workers. Doctors were guaranteed 5 shekels for healing a freeborn person, 3 shekels for healing a freed slave, and only 2 shekels for healing a slave. So at least we got doctors healing people, but you can see the worth degraded as we went along, even in the payment. So he wrote a code of laws that long ago. Next slide. That is Cyrus. And Cyrus was the king of Persia, which is now Iran. And he had written on, we'll show that in a second. That doesn't work any better. He conquered Babylon. So he conquered the ones that we were just talking about. And he freed the slaves. So the doctors got the same rate for everybody. He freed the slaves. He established racial equality laws. Now, that's a long time ago. That's way long before we would have thought. And that people had the right to choose their own religion back then. It was written down on the next slide, which is called the Cyrus Cylinder. And it's a clay tablet they've dug up, and it is ancient, and it's talking about how we should treat each other. Now, I'm jumping ahead in history quite a bit here. There's lots to learn. Google human rights history, and you could spend days on it. It's wonderful. The next slide simply lists the different religions that by about 300 BCE and onward, starting maybe even about 30, 40 AC, Judaism and Confucianism and Taoism, these religions were coming up with who is worthy, how we should treat people, and still in most of them, we're a little bit divided about the saved or the unsaved or the righteous or the chosen, but at least we're still writing about how to treat each other. Next picture, you recognize immediately as the Magna Carta. The Magna Carta was written out by the nobles who protested that the king had more rights than they did. So they wrote out it just means the Great Charter, and in it says that all free citizens had the right to own property. Now you saw the first word there, all free citizens had the right to own property. So we're getting better, but we still have people that don't have those rights. So there's not universal, but it's better. And each of these things, you also have countries and places where they fell back and say, no, that's too many rights, and we cancel rights. But the Magna Carta wanted to get due process before the law, that everyone stood in front of the law. The next one, I didn't know as much about this. This is called the Petition of Rights. And it was another by the people given to the king. And it was the first time it got written down that people shouldn't be imprisoned without cause. Now, imagine that it took that long to figure out that we shouldn't imprison people without cause. The next beautiful, beautiful picture is the Declaration of Rights of Man and of the Citizen. That's French, 1789. And that abolished the monarchy. That was a big step. Abolished the monarchy, so there wouldn't be a difference in the rights between the king, the monarchy, and the people. It also declared for the first time, and you can almost hear music if you've seen movies of this, they declared people had the right to liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression, which of course acknowledges that there was oppression to be resisted. And so in their declaration, you have the right to resist oppression. And we're going to talk a little later about accepting the responsibility to resist oppression. And then next. That's engraved, the Constitution of the United States, we the people. And the next slide is the Bill of Rights. And that was another one time when they wrote down that people had the right to liberty, to property, to freedom, to freedom from violence, the right to bear arms. That's been a very controversial right in the Bill of Rights. And so we come to World War II, just as it was ending. And the massacres, the atrocities, most everywhere you read, it's called atrocities that were happening in World War II before, greater than anything that had ever been before. World War I was also called the Great War, and it was also called the war to end all wars, and it didn't. And so we moved closer to World War II. Right after World War II ended, 100 countries got together and decided we can do better. As a human race, we can do better than the destruction that just happened. So let's put together a document. And their signature, they formed the organization which is the United Nations. And the next slide is their emblems there. You've seen them in different colors, different engravings. The United Nations came together to decide how we could treat people better than we have been doing. And they wrote called 50 countries got together. 50 countries, let's write it out. Let's write down how we want to treat people. And one of the people that had the foremost responsibility, that forged ahead with people even when there was resistance, her name was Eleanor Roosevelt. And if you've heard of her life, she's just a champion of human rights. And her picture is the next slide, and that is her holding the rights. Now I'm wondering if we're able to show that short video clip. This is Eleanor Roosevelt at the United Nations expressing skeptical optimism.
Signs of a change in attitude. I've been disappointed, but I'm not discouraged. All of us must keep on hoping.
Could we just start that again so we could hear it there?
I've been disappointed, but I'm not discouraged. Change in attitude. Throughout this session, I've watched the signs of a change in attitude. I've been disappointed, but I'm not discouraged. All of us must keep on hoping and working for a change, constantly asking ourselves if we are doing all we can to make clear our desire to live in peace and friendship with all our neighbors in the world community. As we separate, it is right that we should be gravely concerned with the gaps that still separate us from each other, with the problems we have left unsolved. Time will help us find answers which now elude us.
That we have these clips is quite amazing. It was a little hard to hear there. She said, I am discouraged, but still optimistic, but she's concerned with the gaps in our human rights, the gaps. So beautifully said. She doesn't look up at all, but there are other interviews of her. Just Google Eleanor Roosevelt on rights, and you'll hear her talking about that. The next slide is the actual cover of the first Universal Bill of Human Rights, and we're going to be looking at them together in a little bit. The next slide is the posters that started to come out about human rights. Really colorful. You've seen some of them in buildings, in government buildings, and in education. The next slide is a game you can play about human rights. And the next slide is another game you can play about human rights. And the next slide is another game you can play, and it teaches children. The next slide came after the Universal Bill of Human Rights, and it was the Convention on the Rights of the Child. I believe, I could be corrected, and please correct me, but I believe the law about the protection of animals came into play in England before the protection of the child, which it was the wrong order, but at least they're coming. And so I'm just asking Donna if she would come here for a moment. Donna does education with children on the subject of many, many things, but just give us an idea of the kind of things she does with children.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I brought forward for Scott something from Equitas, which is from the Canadian Center for Children's Rights, and it's a human rights education tool that I use. Human rights for children encompass the entire village. So when I think of children, I'm thinking of their entire community. My job itself, I work throughout the entire community to help support raising a child. And it is surprising, it's enlightening, it's encouraging. It's also disappointing when I'm working with families from around the world who are new to Canada, who've been in Canada for a while, and the amount of education that still needs to go out with regards to it. I even pulled out, I don't know if you want me to share that, Scott, pulled out some of the Convention of the Rights. Don't worry, I'm not reading a lot. Told you. The rights, there are specific rights that aim to protect humans. And we say humans, all children are human beings, all, and under the age of 18 years of age. And they obviously don't give a starting date. It's birth. but it's under the age of 18. The purpose of it, and a lot of legislation has moved forward because of the purpose, is for children to reach their full potential, for children to protect children, as well as to develop mutual respect. I learned a long time ago that mutual respect is a two-way street. You got to give it in order to get it. And it's starting at that point with children, to teach them the respect that to give respect to the world, to themselves, and to the community that they live in. Some of the big ones, I know I once read a letter to you that outlined some of the rights of children that are there, but there are 42 rights conventions that are documented. I'm happy to share them with you, whereas this is the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which was written 20 years prior to the Convention for the Rights of the Child, and it outlines basic things like housing and feeding, food, and love and protection and security. And it's things that we expect as adults, but forget that children need it as well. Is there anything else that you'd like me to share, Scott? So, okay. I'm happy to share my resource with you. I just brought this one because it's a really good one. It's pretty extensive, but that's where I come from. That's where I come from with my job as well. I work within the early on systems, so I work within the communities that work with, or the communities that love children, and help to build them up, to make them stronger, in order to build that within the children that are within the area. Okay. That's me. Really short, sweet.
Every time you hear a right being defined, or a target children, it's because it wasn't happening. Every time you hear the word right, it's because it had to get there in that form because it wasn't happening. And so, we honor. You'll find out people in West LA, I didn't know they did that. I didn't know they were involved in that. And that's really, I wanted Donna to just share. We hear her sing and know that the values are fundamental to her, and she applies them in her work. So I appreciate that very much. Thank you for that. The binder will be in the lobby after, in the lunchroom there. Next slide. We also have a Human Rights Day. Next slide. It wasn't doing well enough just being a Charter of Rights, and so they made it an international bill. And they divided it into two sections: rights for economic and social and cultural freedom, and on the other side, rights for civil and political freedom, because it was getting more complicated. What happened was the general phrasing, people were finding a way around and out and whatever for the phrasing, so they've gotten more specific with the phrasing. Now, the United Nations, we're going to hear something critical about it in a moment, but the next slide shows the kind of things they've been involved with. The Convention of the Rights of the Child, as Donna said, Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, racial discrimination, workers and their families, migrant workers and their families, political rights, enforced disappearance of persons, what to do. All these spun off from the Declaration and got more specific because the general words weren't enough. Now, the next slide I took from a 1943 news item that said, Canada needs a Bill of Rights. And the picture beside there, in 1960, and I think Donna held it up, was the Canadian Bill of Rights, 1960. But then they were finding, I think it was 40 cases were tried according to the words in the Canadian Bill of Rights, and the oppressors squirmed out of it because the wording wasn't specific enough. So in 1982, they built the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that's the one that stands now. And the last slide on that is a very colorful, beautiful United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So, lots of protection, accepting that it's words on a page. And unless there's authority and influence and power behind it to make it happen, You know, if you've worked in a workplace and the values are on the wall, but if the supervisors don't enforce those values, people on the floor will say, doesn't matter, it's not real. The next slide, I looked at it twice before I figured out what they were saying. The Declaration of Human Rights, and someone has crossed out the L and the A, so the word becomes decoration. Just a decoration, just words until they're enforced. And so I looked up the New York Times 1993. Next slide. The New York Times 1993. And I looked at the things that were happening then. Birth control in China, a stunning, harsh success. That's when they put the law in about how many children you could have and how long you had to wait till you had your next child. And the news clip that goes with that, the picture on the left there is a hut that's been destroyed by the government because the couple had a child 1 year before they were supposed to, and so their home was destroyed. Another teacher asked the question, what is the number of years you have to wait? Misheard, had a child at year 3, and they extracted from his wages for the next 10 years to pay the fine. He couldn't pay it, and they lost their home as well. So this was going on in 1993. The other picture is a bombing that happened in London at the time. And at the same time, the next slide, the chairperson of Amnesty International said, we're going to have a World Congress, a World Convention on Human Rights, but there's a real danger of a retreat in the defense of human rights. If we manage to preserve the status quo, we will have achieved a lot. Now, this is 1993 with all these things happening. That's a while ago. And he's worried at the time that we're going to have a convention, we're going to have all the meetings, we're going to say all the words, but there's a real danger that we are actually going to fall backwards. And he would have been happy if we just stayed the course, just stayed on like that. So the World Congress happened. Next slide. In 1993, there was a World Congress. There it is. And the next slide is the words they declared. The World Conference on Human Rights reaffirms the solemn commitment of all states to fulfill their obligations to promote universal respect for and observance and protection of all human rights and fundamental freedoms for all, in accordance with the Charter of the United Nations, other instruments relating to human rights and international law. The universal nature of these rights and freedoms is beyond question. So, a statement from the World Congress, the World Convention on Human Rights, is saying it's beyond question. Every single person has worth. And the trouble is, of course, again, it was words. So the next slide pushes us ahead to last year. And they held another conference. And they called it Vienna, which is where the first one was, plus 30. And behind the sign of the man standing there is our rights, our future. Our rights, our future. The next slide is 2024, this year. And in New York, they're held a critical perspectives on human rights. Now, they are words. And they're words with no authority unless people say, we're going to do this. We're going to do it together. And so I've asked Kevin to join me. If you could come with another mic. Okay, I am going to invite you to spontaneously respond. So you're going to be told what to say, and I'm inviting you to spontaneously respond. I'm having Kevin read some selections from the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And I'm going to ask you, after he reads one, to spontaneously respond with simply, yes. Yes. And the reason for that is, I'm going to ask us to look at these rights in the sense of they reflect the choice we have made about human worth, that it belongs to everyone. Someone doesn't have to earn that. They don't have to have my approval. They don't have to be from a certain race. They don't have to be a certain color. They don't have to be a certain social economic class. They don't have to be anything other than a human being. So if you're a human being, we choose to say you have worth like everyone else. In fact, even when a person dies, the nursing department has rules about how that body is treated in respect for the humanity of that person. So without any proof other than the fact that you're a human being, the United Nations and many other organizations have put these statements together to say, if you have worth, then you should be treated this way. And each article says, this is how you show that each person has worth. And they're so interconnected that if we muff up on one, we're probably muffing up on another one too. So it takes that idea of, I want to understand what they're about. I want to see the connections they have to our values, the values we've chosen, not because there was proof, just because we chose them, and that we want to be able to communicate them to others. But first of all, our heart has to be refreshed with a yes, that is how I want to be treated. That is how I want others to be treated. So I'm going to ask you right now if you could picture someone that you don't like. Some of you may have a hard time doing that, and some of you may have found it immediately. My question I always ask is it all right to not like someone? Is it all right to not like someone? Of course it is. My goodness. There's all sorts of people you might not like. The idea of human rights is that you see them as a person of worth because of their humanity, even though you could list 5 things you really don't like about them. Now I want you to picture someone in the news or whatever that you know or you believe because of the news is actually standing in the way of human rights. They are oppressing, they are violent, they are whatever. Picture that person. And we're still saying they have human worth. They're not living in a way that we believe at all shows that human worth, but they are people with human worth. Or we're saying, again, there's conditions. So we have to say it's everyone, which is a hard thing to say, that everyone has the human rights because they are a human being, simply because they are a human being. And there are people in my workplace and there are people in your life that don't know that they've never been treated by anyone in their home or their family as if they had rights, as if they had worth, as if they had value. I still have a staff member 10 years later coming to my door and saying, I remember you said we all had worth, and it was because she'd never heard that before. She'd never seen it in her life before. And so I'm saying it's such a precious, precious thing that as Kevin reads these the articles, just a few of them, not all of them, but if we could listen to those words and see how they connect to our values. Yes, that's how we show a person has worth. Yes, that one is how we show that a person has worth. Yes, that's the way. Yes. And as our yes is agreeing, it also says, or we're also saying we commit to those, what can we do about that in this our time of need? So we're celebrating in this abundant blessing for these rights, and we're committing again to say, in this our time of need. So Kevin is going to come to the microphone. You got it. Kevin has his own microphone.
Want me to do all of them or just the one?
Just the first 2 pages.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so you are ready. Maybe we should just rehearse for a moment. Could you put the gallery so we could hear them? Is there a chance the gallery? Hello, gallery. Could you unmute, please, gallery?
If I'm reading them all, I might as well use this.
Yeah, sure. Let me finish though. Gallery, are you unmuted?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're just going to rehearse this spontaneous response. So when Kevin finishes one of the articles of the human rights, we are all going to say yes.
Yes.
Yeah, very good. Okay, maybe a little lower in the volume on the Zoom. There. Okay.
Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of humanity.
Yes.
Yes! Article 2. Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status.
Okay.
Yes.
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 Article 3. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Article 4. No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all its forms.
Yes.
Yes.
No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment.
Yes.
Yes.
Everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law.
Yes.
Yes.
No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation.
Yes.
Yes.
At this point, I just have to apologize. You can see that all of this is, what's the word I'm looking for? It's talking about him, not her, but it applies to everyone. But I apologize for that mishap in their writing of this. Next. Everyone has the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution.
Yes.
Men and women of full age, without any limitation due to race, nationality, or religion, have the right to marry and to found a family. They are entitled to equal rights as to marriage, during marriage, and at its dissolution. Marriage shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses.
Yes.
Yes.
Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, to change his religion or belief and freedom, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance.
Yes.
Yes.
Article Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers.
Yes.
Yes.
Everyone, as a member of society, has the right to social security and is entitled to realization of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for the dignity and the free development of his personality.
Yes.
Yes.
Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favorable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. Everyone, without any distinction, has the right to equal pay for equal work. Everyone who works has the right to just and favorable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity, and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food, clothing, housing, medical care, and necessary social services, and the rights to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. Yes.
Yes.
And lastly, everyone has the right to education directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace.
Yes.
Yes.
I was picturing Kevin reading that, and I was so glad. He should be declaring it on international television and saying, every time you said yes, you were correcting a wrong. Human rights and human wrongs. Every yes said, please, let's do it that way. Remember, the United Nations go, let's not do it that way anymore. Let's not massacre each other. Let's not deny each other rights. So every time you said yes, you were saying that's the way we want people treated. I'm going to ask you to picture another thing. Picture someone, you may never know them, but picture a country, picture a kind of a person, a tribe, a race, an ethnic group or whatever, that you know right now is not being respected for their human rights. We could list them myriad of them, but picture one of them and picture what it would feel like for that person to hear a yes that then had action to it.
You wouldn't give a
We're
damn.
going to change this for you. We're going to change this for you. Just in closing, I have a song I want you to listen to, but after these rights were written out, a little while long, they came up with another one, and it's called the Universal Declaration of Human Responsibilities. The Universal Declaration of Human Responsibilities. And they called it the Fundamental Principles for Humanity. So if you can picture every right that Kevin read out, I forgot to mention Ontario, when they were the first province to add their own Bill of Rights, Ontario did, and they added a couple more. They added pregnancy. Now, remember when I said if you hear something in there, it's because it wasn't happening. So that they had to add that we should respect pregnant people seems so sad, but it is the case. They also added breastfeeding, to respect people that are breastfeeding. So keep adding those things. The more we learn, it's not that we love more, is that we realize who we've left out of our loving. It's not that we love more, it's that we realize who we have left out of our loving. And so these lists of responsibilities, for every right that Kevin read, they place the mantle of responsibility on us to do something about that. And just the first one, for instance, every person, regardless of gender, ethnic origin, social status, political opinion, language, age, nationality, or religion, has a responsibility to treat all people in a humane way. And the sad thought I want to leave you with is there's still words on a page until there's authority and that will say, I was going to say that the authority somewhere cut the power, so I couldn't say that. That's an example. No. They become, they're words on the page until they hit action, until they hit something we do. Now, some of you have written letters, and the letters were about a particular right that we have, and nothing has changed yet. But your action was a responsibility in light of that need. And so every time we're doing one of those things, every time we vote, every time we turn a tap off, every time we write a letter, every time we talk with a neighbor, there's some groups in a neighborhood I know that people have dropped off of the neighborhood talk chat group because of the insults and attacks made on someone who mentions climate change. And so there's work to be done. How many of you had conversations about human rights issues with people that disagree with you almost diametrically, and yet you see them as good people, and they feel so differently about these issues? In fact, it can get to such a pitch of disagreement that you almost back away from it. The Universal Declaration of Human Responsibilities for nonviolence, for respect of life, for calls for justice. So I've thought of it, just my last thing, I put all of this together, all starting with the letter C. It's about our connections. It's about our choice. It's something to celebrate. It's something to commit to. It's something to consider and think about deeply, not tritely. It's something to communicate to others. It's something that deserves our critical thought and our critical observation of out there. It calls for consultation and collaboration, and calls for justice. That's our responsibility if we choose to take it, and if we choose to urge others to take it. I would like you to listen to a song that echoes the song I asked Donna to sing. Hush, someone's calling my name. Freedom is calling. What shall I do? What shall I do? And this is a John Legend song. If you know the singer John Legend, very passionate. And I'm going to ask you to play it right now for us. Really should have just played that. Eleanor Roosevelt was discouraged but not despondent. She was concerned about the gaps. And since we live in the gaps, and these are words from me until their action. So words to action, inviting Donna to have us close with, may our world be a world of love.
Please stand and join me.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.